This video is about diabetes, so I'll bring up the PowerPoint now. This is a Loom video made by STS Medics, and it is all about how to deal with first aid problems when it comes to diabetes. So diabetics have a problem with an imbalance of glucose in their blood. It's quite a complicated subject, but this will define the pertinent points of what we need to know so we can understand a little bit about it and how to deal with the first aid problems that may arise. So generally speaking, there are two types. Type 1, where the person doesn't create their insulin, which is something in our body that breaks down glucose so it can be used in our cells as energy. Our cells in our body need oxygen and glucose to operate to keep us alive, and insulin is created around the pancreas. It's released, it's a hormone that's released, and that kind of opens the gateways to let the glucose from our blood into our cells and gives us that energy. And type 1 diabetics don't create insulin at all, so they can't use the sugar as energy, obviously, which can be fatal, and this condition is usually from birth. Type 2 diabetics struggle to control their sugar levels, so letting the right amount in and out of their cells. It can be brought on by infection, pregnancy, or an unhealthy lifestyle, which is quite common and more common these days. The person can control their sugar levels by their diet, so just eating just the right amount all of the time, and medication. That's usually a medication called metformin. So the problems that diabetics might have, so the first aid problems we might come across if they haven't quite managed to manage their sugar levels quite right, is hyperglycemia, which is high blood sugar. I remember it as in hyper is high, and hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar. Hypo is low, O is low. So hyperglycemia and hypoglycemia. Hyperglycemia often comes on over a long amount of time, over days, so it's not usually a first aid issue. It can be, but it's not very common, and it's caused by them not having enough insulin. So sugar is built up in the blood, but they're not using it as energy, so it's just kind of stored and makes their blood thick, and they need that insulin to let it into the cells to use it as energy. Or diabetics can get hyperglycemia, by having eating too much sugar. So a type 2 diabetic might eat too much sugar, too many donuts, and then they go hyper. But as I say, usually comes on over a long period of time. Hypoglycemia is what we're more likely to come across in a first aid incident, because it comes on very quickly. It can be caused by not enough sugar or food, so they haven't eaten enough, so they've missed the breakfast, or they had to get to an important meeting and forgot to have a snack beforehand, or taking too much insulin and it's let too much sugar through, or too much exercise, or being unwell. For instance, sickness and diarrhea can stop diabetics eating, which can make their blood sugars go low. So there are our two problems, hyper or hypo, and hypo is the one that we're most likely to come across. So here are some of the signs and symptoms of hypoglycemia. Something that is really good to remember is that they often act like a drunk person. So they might have pale skin, be sweating a lot, hungry, a little bit confused, maybe even violent or bizarre acting. They might feel dizzy, sweaty, slurring, and if it gets really serious, seizures, and then eventually unconsciousness. So there's a large amount of signs and symptoms there. But the way I remember is they look quite shaky, sweaty, and drunk. That is the my simple version of it. So what do we do for somebody who presents like this? So the simple answer is that we need to give them sugar. The best way to get sugar into the body is not simply just eating something, because if we eat it we have to then digest it for it then to go into our blood. So eating some biscuits or like jam on toast is a fantastic idea, but initially it's good to get sugar in there quicker, say with a sugary drink, or holding something sugary in the mouth. And diabetics sometimes carry around some glucogel that you can see a picture of at the bottom here, and it's kind of like a tough pasty gel that's full of sugar, and as it goes into their mouth it goes straight into their bloodstream, because the walls of our gums and under our tongue is a very thin type of skin that lets medication and sugar and whatever we put in there basically straight into the bloodstream. So the quickest way to get sugar into the bloodstream is through the gums and under the tongue. And then the second fastest is kind of drinking a sugary drink and then eating as well. Using all of those methods is great. Obviously, if they can, get them to test their glucose with their machine. Call 99 if you're concerned. Obviously, they might just feel a little bit unwell and need a bit of sugar, and then it's all fine. But if they don't return to perfectly normal, obviously get further medical help. If they're unconscious, place them in the recovery position, and we don't attempt to administer insulin. Even paramedics don't do that. If they've gone very hyper and they need insulin, we take them to hospital to manage that. But most people will just need sugar. Most diabetics will just need sugar. So on here I have got a little bit of extra information to what we usually do present on the PowerPoint. So this is relevant for first responders who can take a BN, which is a way of measuring somebody's blood glucose with that little machine, taking a little blood and putting it on a stick. Or somebody that cares for somebody with diabetes, or in a school where you've got somebody who has diabetes and they need to check it regularly. This is an explanation of the scale and the numbers that might present on that machine. So if you have a look at this, our figures in blue are our normal range, so 4 to 8. So when you take a little bit of blood on that machine, everybody that isn't diabetic should have a reading between 4 and 8. That would be normal. And 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is perfectly fine. We don't have to worry if it's 4 or 8. Any of those numbers are fine. So that is a normal range. Now, if it's slightly higher, that is usually when somebody's type 2 diabetic. It is often a little bit higher because it goes up and down, and it's not too much of a worry if it is a little bit higher in the 9, 10, 11, 12 range. If the person wasn't diabetic and they were higher, then you need to send them to the GP to discuss that. But if they are diabetic, a little bit higher in the 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 is okay. As it climbs up closer to 20, we're getting a little bit worried, and then over 20, we're definitely seeking further medical help. If it says 28, 29, 30, or just the letters HI, then you need an ambulance because that is too high. That is hyperglycemia and can develop into something more serious. Now, you notice that I said hyperglycemia comes on slowly, and you can see that because the scale above 8 is quite long, so you have a long period of time, a bit of a bigger buffer. But the range below 4 is only 3, 2, 1, and then dead. So that's why it comes on so much quicker, and you haven't got as much time to deal with it. So if somebody goes ever so slightly below 4, they start to feel very unwell. So at 3, they'll start to look drunk and sweaty and shaky. At 2, they're going to start passing out. And at 1, they're in a very serious condition. They need some sugar and they need to go to hospital because they can go unconscious and go into a coma and obviously die. And there was a long time ago, lots of diabetics died in police cells because they were mistaken for people who were drunk. They were popped in a cell and obviously weren't given sugar overnight because the police people thought that they might have to sleep off their alcohol, and obviously they passed away overnight. So we do have to be careful about that and not mistaking them for drunk people. So that is our Loom talk on diabetes. I hope you found that helpful. I'll see you soon.